side. Baby, we were made from stardust, so shine.
Peace and blessings, family, and welcome to Labors of Love podcast. We are here to inspire, uplift, and enlighten. Each episode, we will be hearing from Black midwives, doulas, and other traditional childbirth supporters who have dedicated their lives to being of service to Black mothers and families in all aspects of the motherhood journey. Greetings and welcome to Labors of Love podcast. This evening, I have the privilege of speaking with Tonya Daniel, founder of EnjoyTheBaby.com. Growing up, Tonya always knew she'd end up working with babies. What she didn't know is that her passion would also lead her to push hard for mama support. Having children of her own and working with growing families for over 15 years, she knows firsthand what many mothers need to feel heard, cared for, and supported. As a parent, Tonya just wanted to do the best she could and be the best for her children. She is here to support others who desire the same. She offers her pregnancy, birth, and breastfeeding knowledge and skills, online and face-to-face, to help families reach their goals. Tonya focuses on removing your obstacles so you can be focused on enjoying moments with your baby. Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm glad you could join us this evening on Labors of Love podcast. I know we don't have a lot of time with you. I always say the bios don't always do us justice. If there's anything you'd like to add or share about, who you are and in this space, please feel free.
Oh, well, thank you. It is an honor and a privilege to be here and to share this space with you all and to your listeners. But I'm pretty simple. The bio kind of touched on a lot of things, but most of the people who know me know I am just literally all about mamas and babies and families. And so, my goal is to find out how I can make those families smile, and to take the fear out of just giving birth, because it's beautiful. And a lot of times the way society is, we don't see a lot of that. So that's been my goal, is to make people give them the opportunity to really understand how beautiful this experience is, and not just the actual birth, but actually the whole thing leading up and after. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
That is beautiful, and definitely so in alignment with, what we talk about here in the purpose in this dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm grateful to have you here. I'm grateful to hear your story. I'm grateful I found you and all the things that you are doing. Social media is a wonderful thing because of that. So I definitely want to just jump right in. From your bio, you said that you knew early on that you would be doing something in this space. What was it about your childhood that led you to believe that?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because growing up, I just knew I wanted to do something with babies. I was fascinated with people who were pregnant. Even as a small child, just wondering what the bellies, they were just beautiful. What's in there, and then when they come out, I wanted to play with the babies. And so I thought I was going to end up being a doctor. I said, well, that's what I was going to do, because that's the only thing I heard, was that the only people who really did anything with babies and, besides being a parent, was a doctor. And so I started on that road. That road didn't end well. I went to school and started taking a lot of those courses, and I was like, this is probably not. But even with the questions that I would ask my family, specifically, my mom because my mom was a teen mom. And so we were very open even early on about, sexuality and birth and different things like that, because I was pretty much being raised while she was being raised. And so a lot of that information came across. So I knew early on I was going to be doing something in that field. It was a little bit discouraging when I didn't get, the medical part of it. But then, I ended up, my high school sweetheart, we got married later on, and then I became pregnant. And so I was like, oh, well, maybe, this is going to be the thing that kind of try to bring, some more definition to what I really wanted to do. And so, because I was in college then, so, it was that road that really led me to get some more definition on what I was really called to do. Um, so it was really amazing about that. And I can go into that because I'll start talking.
And I definitely want you to, because this is definitely a space for you to share your story. It's something
Okay.
so empowering about, someone else going through a relatable experience and being able to
Yeah.
pull so much wisdom from it. So please,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. And so, so we were young. I was 23, around 23, 24 when we started really talking about, planning a family. And so I started, when I became pregnant, I talked to my mom, like most people do. They talk to their mom about, when you're pregnant, this is what, and, it was one of those things where people are like, oh, girl, this is what you go to the doctor, you get that epidural, you do. And I was like, well, there's got to be more than, than just, I mean, I'm really newly pregnant,
Mhm.
so I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I adjust to these changes that are going on. We're excited about it, but how do I adjust to it? They're like, oh, it's just be comfortable in being sick because you're gonna have the morning sickness. It's you're gonna get big. You're gonna get stretch marks. So with all the negative things. And then I was like, okay, well, what about the labor and the birth? Oh, well, you don't have to worry about that because you go to the doctor, that you get the epidural, they deliver the baby, and then you just come home. And so I was like, so that's it.
Right.
I was like, but I'm seeing all these other people talk about, all these different things. And so I was like, there's got to be more.
Mhm.
And so the researcher in me was like, okay, let me look and see what's out there. And so I started reading about different things. And so when I went into my doctor's appointments, it wasn't like people were saying, my family were saying, we just go in and they just tell you what, check the baby, check the heartbeat, you go on. I was like, no. So why am I feeling like this? Well, why is the baby positioned there? What are you doing when you're checking, those different type things? And the more questions I asked, the more information they gave.
Good.
And so it made me start to think, okay, so as we got into labor and talking about labor, they were like, well, there are many options for pain. And, they started naming off all the medications. And I was like, well, I can't even take a Tylenol without, without getting drowsy. I was like, I don't want to miss what's going on. So what are my other options? And so when I went back to talk to my family, they were like, are you seriously talking about doing this without any kind of medication? Are you crazy? They're like, do you realize how much this is going to hurt? And so one of the things that I started saying was, I don't take a lot of medication. How do I get through when I have a headache? How do I get through when I had menstrual cramps? So I started putting those pieces together and I was like, okay, now if I know this is happening and this is my body, if I learn how to train my body how to cope, then maybe I can figure out how to do this whole labor thing. People still thought I was crazy. They still thought I was crazy. And so at my doctor's appointment, I asked her, I said, so if I decide not to take the medication, what other options do I have? She paused a little bit because she was like, well, we get some of those questions, but we don't get a lot of people to
Mhm.
ask, to ask those. She said, I recommend you take a childbirth class. That was something that nobody in my family ever talked about. Nobody ever mentioned childbirth classes or anything like that. And I found out later one of the reasons why they never mentioned it is because I'm from rural Granville County
Okay.
in North Carolina. There's one hospital
Mhm.
which I didn't go to, but only because I wanted to ask. I had a lot more questions, and so I was like, I want to go to a different hospital. Nothing wrong with that hospital, but just the options. They didn't have any childbirth classes
Mhm.
at the time that people knew about it, and the places that people would go for education were not places that. I mean, you would have a lot of people that were credible. It was more like somebody's just giving their experience on what policies were, not so much of what the options I had. And so I took a childbirth class. And in that childbirth class, my husband and I were asking a lot of questions. And the instructor was like, are you a teacher? And I was like, no. And she said, because you're asking a lot of questions. And what I would do in the class was if there were other there were only like maybe 2 or 3 other Black couples in the class.
Mhm.
And so they would look confused, and I was like, "Do you understand what they're saying?" And so I would kind of go back through and say, "Okay, this is what," because I was used to the medical stuff. I
Yeah.
just, and so I would kind of interpret it. And so that's one of the reasons why the teacher was asking me. She said, "Are you a teacher?" She said, "Because you're explaining some of this stuff."
Wow.
And so I would explain it. My husband would explain it to the dad. And so we ended up having our little our little group there, just really kind of helping each other through. And she was like, "Are you gonna get the medications?" And I was like, "No."
Yes.
And she was like, "Are you serious?" I was like, "We can do this." I was like, "We have the options. They're telling us what we can do. We just need to practice." And so we were kind of like cheerleaders to each other. And so after that, my family, of course, was literally like, "We'll support you. We think you're crazy, but you need to, but we'll support you." And so once I went on to have the baby, once I wrote out everything, I said, "This is what I want," and I took it back to the doctor and the midwife, and I said, "This is what we want to do.
Mm.
Can you do this?" And the midwife looked at me and she said, "Are you sure?" She said, "Because if I'm on call," she said, "we're going to stick to it. If you're that gung ho with it." And we're like, "Yeah, this is what I want to do." And so between my husband and I, we came up with a game plan. We were like, "Okay, if it gets this hard, then this is what we'll do." We had a game plan for it all. And so going through that whole scenario, it was challenging, but it also helped my family to realize that, wow, these are other options. And so they started telling other people. And so people started calling me saying, how did you do that? So that's kind of how I ended up getting started, because people were like, nobody does that and actually survives having this. I said, we've been doing this for years. Women have been doing this for
Millennia. That's how we got here.
exactly.
Oh my
And
goodness.
and so that's what started. So I was kind of doing an impromptu childbirth classes with people
Mhm.
that I knew. And so finally somebody, when one of my friends went, I went with her to her doctor's appointment, and she said, "Are you a childbirth educator?" And I was like, "What? No, I don't even know what that is." And she said, "Well, she's telling me all the stuff that you told her, and that's what childbirth educators do." So I went back and called the childbirth educator that actually taught our class and say, "Hey, how do I do what how do I do what you do?" And so she started there. I didn't end up getting certified through with that organization, but I found out later that one of my good friends from high school, and Tara Schuler, who ended up being the president, the first Black president of Lamaze International.
Okay.
She was actually one. She was like, "Look, I can show you how to get through this." And so she was one of my mentors that said, "Okay, this is how we get through. Get through the education, the certification." And from there, I started doing it. Doing it, teaching in hospitals, teaching private classes. And the way I became a doula was because how I ended up teaching the class. People said, "Can you come with me?"
Yes.
And and I was like, "Well, I can help you." And some of them, my very first doula client was a military mom whose husband had just gotten deployed.
Oh, she
And so I was like, "Well, I can't say no to her. She
was.
doesn't she doesn't have anybody."
Yeah.
But that was the turning point of when I became a doula. Because after I actually witnessed it with somebody else, I was like, "Oh my goodness." It was like I was like a junkie. I was
Yeah.
like, "Okay, who else is having who else is having a baby?"
Birth of the babies. Yes. But
And that's
this
what
is
happened.
such an amazing story. And I think it's like the an amazing example of empowering yourself with
Hmm.
information and how that propels you and just opens you up to like passion and purpose.
Yeah,
And I know you mentioned
definitely.
that on your website, but to I truly believe that this is a calling, that when you
Yeah,
do work you are absolutely called to do it, but just to have such a clear almost timeline of how this came to be. And it's all the things that we encourage people to do, like find out the information,
yeah,
do the research for yourself, because once you start opening that door, then you realize you have options, and like you say, you ask the
exactly.
right questions.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's amazing. And the
yeah,
unmedicated birth, and just how you came to that conclusion, because I know for me it was the information I came across, and like you
yeah,
said, medication I don't do well, so what is going to happen to the baby, because
yeah.
whatever I'm putting in me is going to impact this unborn child. So
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, and it was one of those things that people say, "Well, how did you know to
mm,
ask those questions?" It's you. And I think that's a lost art that a lot of women, especially Black women, they don't trust and have confidence in their gut feeling. Because I mean, the bottom line is there. Regardless of what's going on around you, you have a gut feeling
Yeah.
about different things, and sometimes you just need to trust yourself and just go with it. Whether it's you might not even. Sometimes people say, I don't know what I don't know,"
Mhm.
but you know what doesn't feel right.
You do.
And so, and so, if something doesn't feel right, just ask questions. Eventually, it'll come out, and
Yeah.
eventually, it'll get you on the right path. And I'm definitely a firm believer of, you take the step, it'll lead you in the right direction. It
Mhm.
may seem like you're going in the wrong direction because I literally was clueless
Yeah.
about this whole field. I was like, people were like childbirth educators, doulas, lactation consultants. I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't know what that is, but I knew what I needed. I
Right.
knew what I needed in order to feel confident. And those asking those questions and being open to the answers that were given to me. And if the answers didn't sound right, then I asked somebody else, until I got some information. And so, that was one of the things, and I think that's one of the things that keep driving me is
Hmm.
is the fact that we live in a society where a lot of people don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And so it takes people like elevating that, and then other people coming out and speaking on the positives of birth. Just that, yeah, you can have a positive birth experience. You don't have to, just have something done to you. You're an active participant in your birth. And I say that, even when I teach classes, I'm like, no. Even when I do my consults with clients, I tell them, you never go into a provider's office, or whether it's a midwife or there's a provider, without at least 2 or 3 questions.
Yeah.
You never. Don't just go in there and just let them do whatever they're going to do. You get something out of it as well.
Oh,
And I think that started with me early.
yeah. That's amazing support that you're giving. And so that speaks to kind of the guidance and the services you provide as a
Mhm.
doula. And also, how has that transitioned now that we're in a pandemic? If you can't physically be there, so that
Yeah.
role and asking the right questions, and then how we transition in a time when we're distancing.
Yeah, the pandemic did a lot of things. It did a lot, and not all of it was bad. I know we looked at it as being a really bad experience, but I think some of the silver linings in the pandemic was really causing people to be more in tune to themselves, and really starting to put their filter out there, because we couldn't do face to face.
Yeah.
We couldn't do face to face. We couldn't just go over somebody's house and ask questions. You had to, do phone calls, or you had to do, telemedicine or Zoom calls or things like that. But more importantly, which is, side note, something I need to pick back up with the social media. But there was a lot. People were watching social media to really try to figure out what was going on, and what was going on in the world and what was going on in the birth world. And so my practice has changed a little bit because I started getting a lot more questions with, okay, well, I'm scared. Nobody can go with me into the hospital. What do I do? When they were really just depending on their outside people, depending on their doctors, depending on their other support people. And so what I had to do was really bring them back in and go, okay, this is what you need to focus on. Let's get your mindset right. Let's start thinking about what you want. Think about that. And one of the things that I used to say a lot was, let's turn off the negativity,
Yes.
because you kept putting everything on social media, and especially this was a time when we know the statistics with Black maternal health, but
Absolutely.
it's like it was escalated during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Especially with all the other racial injustices and racial tensions, and so people, it was just fueling fear. And
Hmm.
so I told people, turn it off.
Yes.
Turn it off. If you're getting ready to go into warfare with, birthing your baby, you have to prepare for that, and you can't prepare if you're having to compete, with it. So a lot of my work, because I wasn't going in with people in the hospital, was really doing that early preparation, and I called it, like the birth planning.
Okay.
Let's plan what this is going to look like. Whether somebody's there or not, let's plan what it's going to look like. And if you can call me these are going to be some of our key phrases that we're going to keep talking about. When we're talking about, how are you going to condition yourself? How are you going to prepare yourself mentally? Because this whole birth is a mental and a spiritual situation here. So, so you can't just go by what's just on the physical, the outside. It's something that's really got to be ingrained with you. And it's not something you can just pick up today and say, I'm going to have a baby tomorrow. You have to practice it. So we kind of shifted a little bit.
Indeed. It sounds like you're getting them in that birthing state of mind.
Yeah.
And shut off the chatter, because you have to be in that vibration of, that positive.
Exactly.
Like, this is the outcome I desire. I can see it. I can visualize it.
Exactly.
The voice and the advocacy of you being physically present. They have to have that, that empowerment kind of embedded in them so that they can walk in that space. That is just everything that you are saying right now. I'm like, if I wrote a book like that, you're just covering all of the bases, as far as like the motivation behind this work and the solutions, because what you're really speaking to right now is what are the solutions that are going to allow us to change these outcomes, to consider the norm.
Yeah, exactly. Because and one of the things that has really been prevalent to me as well is the fact that of strengthening the family, because especially with the pandemic, we have a lot of single moms, we have a lot of couples, but then we have a lot of families that are really trying to, to be honest, just trying to make it through because of whatever residual effects that came out of the pandemic. So another thing that I was really focusing on with a lot of my younger families is like, okay, I can't be there, but if they offer you one person, I don't want to take that space if you have somebody else that can support you. And they kind of took that a little differently at first. And I'm like, okay, who are you closest to? Who is the person that makes you feel the most safe? And some of them say my spouse, my partner. I said, then that's the person I want to talk to, because I want to get them to be your doula. And so, and that was challenging for me, because as a doula, I took pride in being there to be able to help usher them from being that person to that parent, but also looking at, okay, Tonya, what is your goal? Your goal is to empower that family, and let them be strong so they can be strong parents. So if that means me stepping out of the picture, then what I need to do is equip that support person that's going to be there for that birthing person. So whether it's a partner, whether it's a spouse, I need to give that person whatever. So it's almost like a big dump. I'm like the Matrix. I'm just transferring everything, downloading everything I can into that support person, because when it comes down to it, at some point I'm going to step out of the picture, and it may be just those people there. And so, part of me helping to recreate that birth space, sometimes it's just stepping away and going, okay, let's do that download, And a lot of the families I work with, the birthing people that I'm working with, sometimes they look at it and go, but we want it. I'm like, no, you got my knowledge. You got the knowledge. And if you have somebody who's caring and they're not going to let you fall. So you're going to be okay. And so I teach them how to advocate. I teach them how to go through their birth choices. I teach them how to talk with their providers. How if their provider's saying something, tell them, okay, you need to tell me what the benefits are. What are the risks? What are the alternatives? All those different things. And then I tell them, don't forget to trust your intuition. If it's something you don't feel comfortable with, then you have these are the things you can do to buy yourself some time. Meanwhile, I can tell you to do the stuff to get the baby moving, right? Right. But that's what I'm trying to build in them, that confidence. And if I had to have one word, is really building confidence, because I think we really need to get back to trusting our bodies and trusting ourselves.
Yes, and finding your voice. No, that is amazing. And I'm just thinking about how transformative that experience, that now that they were, somewhat afraid to go alone, that you prepared them for. Now they have that together that they shared. How does that change the dynamic or strengthen it coming out of, the birth of this life? So that is phenomenal. So I like to always kind of give the audience, a story of an experience that you've had that kind of solidify or embodies what drives you and motivates you to continue to do what it is that you do. Do you have a story that comes to mind that's an example of that?
Yeah, I actually have two, and they're very different. And I'm gonna try to be real brief, real brief with them. But one of them was there was a mom who was planning a pregnant, and I thought when she contacted me, I thought she was already pregnant.
Okay.
She was actually thinking about becoming pregnant.
Mhm.
And so she was asking all the questions. Well, how do I do this? And what if it feels like this? And I'm like, okay, well, how far along are you? And she said, oh, I'm not pregnant yet. And I rarely get somebody who's not
Right.
pregnant contact me. And she said, oh, I'm not pregnant yet. She said, but I'm just trying to fill out this whole doula thing because I want to prepare. I want to make sure I'm giving my. And she was a Black mom, and she said, I just want to make sure I give myself the best shot. And so we talked for about a year of her just what she needs to do and making sure she's getting herself healthy. And so I mean, it almost like we became friends because she would call me every once in a while and we'll talk. Well, when she became pregnant, she was like, well, you can be my doula, right? And I was like, well, oh, yeah, but I also I treated her just like everybody else. I said, I want you to make sure I've helped you with the prenatal piece, but I need you to interview other doulas as well to make sure that I'm the best fit, because this is a once in a lifetime shot. I can be a friend and I'll always be there to support you. I said, but you need to make sure that I'm the one that you want in your birth space. And so she did. She came back and said, I want you. And so we worked through that whole situation with the birth experience. She had challenges with her family because her family, she said, based on what I know, I don't want to have any kind of medications. I want to do this. I want to give birth at the birth center, all this different. And I was like, okay, her family had to win them over. They were still kind of skeptical. She had the baby, beautiful birth experience, even though it was challenging for her. She had a pretty long, long birth. But while I was there, her parents were there, her boyfriend was there, and they actually saw the transition of how dedicated she was to that whole thing. I even helped her boyfriend to try to show. I was like, okay, this is how you do this, because he didn't want to do anything in the beginning, but trying to bring them in. And then her family was like, I can't believe she's actually doing this. She's actually giving birth. And her mom kept saying, she's not even asking for the epidural. And I'm like, she's got it. She's got it. And then afterwards, she was able to breastfeed. And nobody in her family they were breastfeeders. They said, we just didn't do that. And so even after then, to see the family tell other people, this is what you should have saw her, man. I was screaming when and so those type things to me, I look at it as legacy.
Yes.
Because that makes the transition to the next person. Whoever, it could be a cousin or a friend that says, okay, well, she did it, so I can do it. And then they'll ask her, well, what did you do? How did you do that? And then dad, that kept that bond there with them, for whatever their relationship. So it's stuff like that that keeps me going.
My goodness.
And the most recent thing was, especially during this pandemic, I got a call from a random person never met. They just found my name off of the internet, and they called and they said, I'm wanting to talk to somebody about virtual doula services. And I was like, oh, and so I'm talking to her, and she said, what? And I asked her, when would she do? And she never answered the question. And then she was texting me and she never answered the question. There was big pauses in between these text messages that were going back and forth. And so I'm thinking maybe she's not really interested. Right. Then she calls me, she texts me back again. And I was like, are you okay? And she was like, can you tell me what it's like to have contractions or whether I know I'm in labor? She was in labor. And,
wow.
We had been texting for about 2 hours, and there were these. And so I went back and started looking at the spaces in between the text messages. So I asked her just point blank. I said, "Can I call you?" And she was like, "No, I don't want to call." I said, "You FaceTime," and I thought about it. I was like, you know what? If she is in labor, I said, "Where are you?" And she said she was at home. Is anybody there with you? And so I literally gave her a crash course on what's going to happen, she needed to call somebody. I said, you need to call 911 or you need to call. She said, well, I have a midwife. And so, turns out she was out of state and she
Mm.
had been calling different people. And I was the one that responded to the text. And so literally we were between those calls and her boyfriend that got there. I was texting the boyfriend until the midwife got there.
Wow.
And telling him what to do, which was not the easiest thing in the world to tell somebody what to do over a text message. And so I was doing voice message trying to explain stuff. But when the midwife got there, the midwife said, whoever you are, you've done a great job.
Oh my gosh.
And so I'm like, because we hadn't signed anything confidential, so I didn't feel like I could really ask for them to send me pictures or anything.
Okay.
Because I was like, if you feel okay about it, you can send me a picture, but I'm really not your legal doula. But it's those type things that, whether I've had a relationship with you or not, if you search me out, and that I just have this feeling I just can't leave you there, because I kept asking, where are you? Because I was trying to find another doula that was in the area that may be able to get over there. But to be able to go and for her to birth, and then that midwife say, whoever you are, you did a good. I was like, I did a good job. I did a good thing.
Confirmation. Confirmation. Yeah. Well, I truly appreciate you. The time has flown, and I swear I can listen to your stories all night. It's just so, motivating and empowering, and just to hear the stories and how significant they can be to whole families. Yeah. And I think these conversations, that's the goal and the motivation, to have that kind of impact on the community and the society as a whole, because we need to normalize, this kind of discussion, these kind of realities. And I'm just grateful for you accepting the calling to do this work, all the people that you've impacted just by, following that guidance. And like you said, listening to that intuition, that gut, and doing what you're called to do. So thank you so much. Before we go, please let people know how they can get in touch with you.
So my website is enjoythebaby.com, and I'm on Instagram at enjoythebaby. Those are probably the best ways to get in touch with me, and contact information is on there. And I do respond. It may take me a little bit, but usually I try to check and try to keep up. Let's keep up with life is a doula, and childbirth educator and a lactation consultant is busy.
Yes.
And so but those are the best ways to reach me, and my contact information is on both of those.
Excellent. And I will definitely make sure that information is in the description. So if you're watching the replay, definitely share. If you know someone who, is in need of this kind of service, if you know someone who this is resonating with, if they want to, further the conversation, definitely reach out. That's what this platform is about, making those connections. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Please, again, share. And thank you so much, Tonya, for joining.
Thank you. I appreciate your audience, and definitely reach out for anything.
Thank you.
Thank you.